So tonight, because we have about an hour-ish time period, I wanted to cover a little bit about FrogWatch. And so our trainings typically, and I'll go into it a little bit, last about 2.5 hours. So tonight I'm going to touch on what FrogWatch is a little bit, what's happening in our area, good resources, and then I'll talk a little bit about how you can get involved. So what I wanted to talk about tonight, and the title of my presentation tonight, is what's happening to our smaller spring breeding frog species in the St. Louis metro area. So to jump on in, I'm first going to introduce myself. So who I am, if you don't know who I am, my name is Mike Dawson. I have been working in the, I guess you want to call it the zoo field, for 24 years. I've been, and actually 28 years, but in St. Louis, about 24 years. Full-time, and I'm also an adjunct professor at Webster University. My primary interest in all the things that I do is frogs. I used to be a snake person, but as I got older, I got tired of being bit. So I moved to frogs, a little easier for me. And I've always had an interest in frogs, and the way I eventually got involved in some of the frog conservation work that I do was, like a lot of people, I heard frogs and I thought I'd like to get involved in some kind of project where I could go out and listen to frogs and help people. So I Googled it, and I heard about FrogWatch, and on the internet it said you ought to contact your nearest zoo. I'm like, well, I am the nearest zoo. So that's how I got involved, and I created a chapter. And so tonight I'm going to talk a little about what I have found out in our area. So first of all, how many people heard these noises recently, or in the past, or in the last 10 years? Cool, I got some people raising their hands. So depending on where you live, you still might hear some of these. Now, that was actually recorded up in North County. And I'm going to explain what I have found out in the last, I think I say 8 years since I've started doing surveying. I started doing bioblitzes in 2004 in Forest Park, and have worked my way out. And one of the things that we have found, which is kind of interesting, and I'll jump to my next slide here, maybe. There we go. Oh, there we go. So what is going on in our area? Well, if you were to look at a big picture, so if I was to go like really big, like the world, and look down, right now, amphibians, unfortunately, are not doing well. There's about 40% of amphibians are threatened with extinction, or at least threatened. And if you look at this map, what it'll show you is where the hot spots are. So most frogs, until diversity is in a tropical region. It doesn't mean we don't have a lot of diversity, because we do. But the biggest die-offs and things that are threatened happen to be in Central and South America and some places in Asia. And there's lots of different reasons for it. In our area, I'll kind of zoom in from world and then zoom into our area. So if you were to zoom in here, you look at this area, the United States, about 45% of U.S. species are wetland dependent, which is pretty unique, actually. And if you were to look at it in smaller in our area, like zoom in into Missouri and Illinois area, depending where you live, about 87% of Missouri and 90% of Illinois original wetlands are gone. So in the last 200 years, they've been drained, altered in some way, or degraded. And so when you think about that, it has a huge impact. And so right now in our area, so the Midwest, there's about a 2 to 3% decline still. Now, we've had bigger declines back in the 70s and 80s. But as 90s and the 2000s, we were about 1 to 2%, and that was based on the last current trends that we're seeing. And they can still continue, but we're at a slower rate than we are if we were in Central America or something like that. And there's a couple of reasons why, and we can get into it. So if you look at this, what is happening specifically in our area? So when I started to investigate, and I started running FrogWatch, you started looking at the data coming in, I started investigating the wetland areas. And if you take a look at this particular map, this is all the wetland areas that make up Missouri, and then make up our little area in St. Louis. And it's interesting, and they've definitely been, if you know the history of St. Louis, I did not grow up here. I've been here a while, but I was not born here. And it was really interesting to learn the history of like River to Pear. I used to go all the way through Forest Park. And obviously in the World Fair, they covered it over with wood. boxed it in. Eventually, it got concaved in, or at least bricked in, and now it's underground in Forest Park. So a lot of our rivers and streams have changed. Some have been used as sewers over the history of St. Louis. Some of them are completely gone. I've talked to a lot of people about what they used to know that grew up here, and there actually were springs in Forest Park, which I did not know, which is very fascinating. It's definitely changed a lot. And if you look at some of these pictures, what's happened to a lot of our areas that still have water inside the city, a lot of them, if you look down in that left picture, it's been straightened. That's River de Pear. And a lot of our rivers have riprap on the sides. They're straightened, they're concreted, which does not allow a lot for the water to grow in and plants, and it's not great habitat. Other areas they've created, especially for retention ponds, are great for some wildlife and it's good for soaking up different types of pollution, but it's not great for frog. And one of the other things that is an issue is fishing. I love fishing, but a lot of the places in the city that I to survey, I ran into the issue where almost every single one had stock ponds. And it's great for recreation use, but it's even though it's water, it's not a great place for frogs, for at least certain species. Now, if you look at this particular picture here, so these are the local frogs and toads in our area, and this is what I've collected over the last 15 years with doing frog watch and community science projects. It looks pretty good. Obviously, you can see areas where there aren't any little green dots, and those are areas where either there wasn't anybody collecting data or there just wasn't a lot of area, land mass where they could, or at least water where they could survive. But when you start looking at it, there is a trend, and we're not the only city. I've looked at other cities and they have a similar trend. And the trend that we're finding is there are frogs and toads here. There's always going to be frogs and toads when you have water. But unfortunately, what we are seeing is this as a trend. Certain species, specifically a lot of your early spring breeding frogs, and especially these that are in the Hylidae family, which is the tree frog family. The tree frog is doing fine, but the other smaller members that come out early in the spring, so early as February, these particular species are slowly being pushed out of the metro area. When I first started going out surveying, I used to get a lot of calls from Webster Grove of people saying they heard spring peepers. I believe they're not here, and I'll explain why. I think they were, and there are areas that I have found a few pockets of remaining spring peepers. I even have a recording from Webster University of a spring peeper, a lone male calling from the retention pond. And that was like now it's been 12 years ago. So they were still here. They were just slowly disappearing, being pushed out. And a lot of it, I think, is just their habitat is gone. So when I started looking at this, I asked the zoo and they allowed me to create a wild care program, but a different kind. So most of all our wild care programs focus on animals that are endangered or threatened. They allowed me to create the first of its kind, which is a project that focuses on animals before they go extinct or endangered or something like that. Now, we still on the Illinois side, we have chorus frogs that are endangered on that particular side of the river. But in our general area, we don't have a bunch of endangered species, but they're slowly being pushed out. And so the goal of this was to help conserve a lot of our Hylidae or spring breeding species that are in the St. Louis area. And to identify and study the urbanization causes. And that's something we've slowly been working on the last couple of years. And also to increase the urban diversity and reestablishing areas. And that's something that's a long-term goal. And we want to educate others about what's happening and get people more involved in some of our community science projects and our conservation work. And also to explore some new innovative methods to help these animals for sustainability around people. And that could be ways to build and install different retention ponds that are more suitable for frogs and toads or other areas. And also some new ways to survey. So the first thing we did, and I've been doing it now for the last 3 years, to see what is going on and not just to have community science data, but to go along with that data and put recording devices. And so I spent the last, now it's 4 years, actually with recording devices all over the city. So if you might have run into one before, but I've had them all over parks, and it takes a lot of work actually to get the permits to put recording devices all over the city. And I thought it'd be easy, but it's not. It's a lot of area. And so with help, I've had different interns, I've had employees working with me. We set out and we have now recorded all of the water areas in our area. And we indeed are finding what the community science data was showing, just a little more detail, but we are finding that indeed, unfortunately, this happens to be the range that I have come up with spring peepers. So it is interesting when you look at this map. You can see that there are some populations still down in the bottom of South County, pushing down in that area. Most of this is actually a little bit below that and some of the Jefferson Barracks area. And it is interesting. The reason why I think is there's sinkholes down there, and that's where I found them all. Because sinkholes are hard to develop, and usually wooded areas. One of the things that a lot of these spring breeding frogs need that we don't always think about, of course, we're looking for wetlands, because we're going to look for those because that's where they breed. That's where you hear them. That's where you see them. But when they're done breeding, that's actually a small portion of their life during the year. The rest of the year, they're in leaf litter. And so they need a huge wooded area around them, and that doesn't exist. And as you get outside the 270 belt, you start picking up larger swaths of wooded areas with these wetland areas, and that's why they're still around. However, what I am seeing is certain species, the chorus frog being one of them, is pushed even farther out. And so there are some that on the, like if you think more sensitive to pollution and changes in the environment, chorus frogs unfortunately are. The ones that are least out of this early breeding ones, I think, are the cricket frogs, and in between are the spring peepers. Now, I didn't show you all my maps, but this is just a map of the spring peeper population that I have found based on the data collected. And it gives you a pretty good idea of where we're heading if we don't do anything, or find other ways to at least maintain the populations that we have. And now cricket frog map is interesting because I have found some really unique populations along Gravois Creek. And so I do have a new program I'm working on. It's not a program, I guess. I have a chapter, a stream team chapter I'm creating with the zoo along there, to protect the populations that we have found. So once I get that going, I'll send you guys a link once we get that up and running. But it's just another way that we can get involved using Missouri's Department of Conservation stream team. So that gives you kind of an idea. And so the other ways we're getting involved, and this actually, I think Victoria's out there in the crowd, but I got involved working with Victoria and collaborated on a project where we're exploring different methods for surveying. And so along with acoustic surveying, we're starting to get involved in looking at DNA barcoding as a method for surveying, because a lot of times you do catch species that are pretty hard to identify, especially larvae. And so proof of concept right now, we are out and we're collecting DNA swabs, and hopefully we can get a hit and identify them by species. And I also have an undergraduate student I'm working with now named Hannah Fair. So we're out collecting this year, and then working with Victoria in the lab. And so hopefully this will become another method that we can employ besides acoustics. So we'll have a lot of different methods to really fine tune where these species are. And hopefully we can apply this across the river as well, so we can expand these techniques for surveying purposes. So that's what's happening right now, at least as far as surveying wise. And if you were to get an idea of, well, why should you care, which is, a great question. And before I do that, I saw all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to stop actually, since there's so many questions in here, and I'll answer these before I jump in. Why should we care? So let me go to the top here and see. Oh, there's all kinds of questions. All right. Say, oh, happy St. Patrick's Day. All right. Let's see. We do. Oh, I went too far up. Hold on. So we did have some people, and I'm going to talk about FrogWatch, which is great. During the okay, cool. So the question is, I'll answer: is there any app like Merlin that are like for birds for frogs? And the answer is no. There should be, but there is not. I am always in contact with different people, hoping to push that along because it would be very helpful. There are ways to identify frog calls, but there is not an app as of right now, which is why we're still doing FrogWatch training with frog calls. And we're going to go over some calls tonight, because I can't do a presentation without noise. So we're going to hopefully do some frog calls tonight. iNaturalist does do ID, but it doesn't do ID with frog calls. You can put them on there, and I'll talk about how I'm using that as well. You can get people to help you with the frog calls online using like crowdsourcing. If there's any other question, let's see. So can you talk about restoring wetlands in the age of AI centers? That is an issue that I think we will probably have to maybe put towards the end, because that's a huge question to get into. But that's a very good thing to bring up. That's a neat question. So what I want to jump into, if you were to look at like a picture of usefulness, which is not why I usually like frogs, I love frogs, but they are a huge benefit to humans as well as the natural world. So if you wanted to look at it in a selfish point of view for humans, number one, they are a huge part of the food chain. So they're great for that ecosystem. Then they eat a lot of insects. So if you look at disease control, there's a couple estimates out there now. There's a lot of papers published on it trying to estimate like how many insects, just like, bats eat a lot of insects. Toads, they've estimated somewhere between 9 to 10,000 insects in a springtime or so a season. So if you multiply that by, I don't know how many toads are out in that area, that's a lot of insects. And the different sizes, the diversity, if you have small spring peepers at the size of your pinky, as adults, and you have large bullfrogs, you're eating the gambit of larva and mosquito larva size all the way up to pretty large grasshoppers. And so having that diversity in our area is massive for that food chain. And when they're gone, you lose that, just like when bats are gone, you're going to lose, unfortunately, that major balance. The other one I wanted to mention out there is the medical use. There's a lot of studies going on around frogs and toads, and it has to do with the fact that because they have this neat slime that protects their skin. It keeps them from drying out. But they also have stuff in their slime. They have proteins in their slime that protect them in a couple different ways. So they do have antibiotic properties and antifungal properties. And so one of the neat studies now is finding usefulness of those for people. So new antifungal drugs, antibacterial drugs that are from their chemicals that they secrete. And there's also a lot of neat things about them internally. So right now, I know there's a study I've read not long ago about proteins that are found in bullfrog blood. And it just happens, I don't know how somebody figured this out, but they figured out that it actually neutralizes the toxins that are in red tide. And so there are all kinds of really unique things that they are finding. And these are just local frogs, just like the ones you find around here, that have really neat properties. And that's not even considered, like frogs in South America and poison dart frogs. They have all kinds of new drugs they use during surgeries now to make your muscles slow down. And that came from poison dart frogs. So there's lots of very unique uses of these animals. And right now, cryogenics is still a big interest for a lot of people. And a lot of these frogs, well, they evolved basically cryogenics a long time ago. We have wood frogs in our state that range from here all the way to Canada. And during the winter time, they will be frozen and their heart stops and their brain stops for about 4 to 5 weeks at a time, and they thaw and they get a little bit of a heartbeat and then they freeze again, which is amazing. There's no damage to their body. And so they have some really neat adaptations in that area. So there's lots of good reasons why we should want to selfishly protect frogs, besides the fact that, well, they're cool. Now, the other reason why they're important to pay attention is they are sensitive to changes in the environment. And so as things change really quickly because of the sensitive skin, they lay their eggs in water. So seasonal changes, climate change is going to show up pretty quickly in some of these species. Their larva stages, at least in our areas, are always in water. And the adults, depending on what species they are, at some point are going to be in water, at least breeding in water. And so they are like that canary in a coal mine, or at least this one shows you like a little frog in a cage. These guys are affected, unfortunately, a lot. And so it's a good indicator in our areas if they are disappearing, especially specific species. It gives you an area where you can compare. And one of the things I'm doing in some of my studies is looking at what food availability might be in different areas. Huge changes in the ecosystem has had a huge effect on some of our frogs and toads. I have a few colleagues that are researching saline, and basically when you think of ice melt, what does that do in our area? Because these guys are breeding, laying eggs. And if you were to have a massive ice melt, some of the people that I know have done some of the measurements, they are finding in some places like seawater. So in certain months, especially in February, as stuff melts, it spikes pretty high. So it could have a huge impact. And they know in laboratories it does. But to show that it is directly having an effect on the environment, at least on some of our frog species, nobody's at least published anything yet. So I think there's a lot of areas that we can continually to explore to see how we are affecting our frogs and toads, and if there's any other way to mitigate those things. Now, it's important to know what our frogs and toads are, at least as far as like recognizing them. It is nice that, unlike birds, and I love birds, but there's a lot of them. In our area, there really is no more than about 23 frogs or toads. Now, tonight, I'm not going to go over that many, but I wanted to at least go over the common frogs and toads and talk a little bit about them. So at least you've heard some of them, and I'll talk about different ways to get involved in what we're doing in FrogWatch and what FrogWatch is. But I wanted to put this in the middle to break it up a little bit, and so you guys can learn some frog calls. So you may need to adjust your sound on this one, maybe turn it up, and if it comes out too loud, then turn it back down. Some of my frog calls could end up being loud, and some may be a little soft. I'm going to turn my sound up as well. But to jump in here, we have a couple toads, but the most common toad, and this is one that I'll be honest, you can find almost anywhere. It's really common, which is nice, the American toad. What's neat about toads is they do have that thicker, bumpier skin. And so they can go away from water a lot longer than other species because they don't dry out as fast. They do have parotid glands. So if you think about their head, and you can see the eyes in this picture, go right behind the eyes on the top of their head. They have little poison glands called parotid glands. And it's really good for protection when an animal bites these things. It comes out pretty fast, or if you handle them a lot, you'll get it on your fingers, and it feels kind of like if you've ever gotten bleach on your hands get slippery. If you ever get that stuff in your mouth, which I recommend, please don't. But if you do get them into your mouth, it'll burn like a lot. How do I know? Because I've not washed my hands before. It does. I've actually had my tongue go numb. Don't recommend it. But when I was younger, I had my dog, and my dog was a basset hound, one very smart dog. But my dog ate a toad. And how did I know? Well, because it was foaming at the mouth. And it looked like it had, swallowed toothpaste or something, all foam coming out, and then it threw up a toad. And it had gas all day. Now, you would think you would learn, but my basset hound growing up, I think it ate 3 toads. It happened every time. It was not a smart dog. But most animals would not. And sometimes I've seen animals spit them out when they try to eat them, especially mammals. Now, there are animals that, of course, have adapted and figured out how to get around to, eating a toad. If you ever find a dead toad, but the top of it's fine, it's probably a raccoon. They eat them from the bottom. They figure out not to put your mouth on top of the toad and go on the bottom side. So most of the toxins are on a toad, just happen to be on the top, whereas a lot of different frog species will have secretions everywhere. And that's pretty good protection. I like, because everybody was asking me, are all frogs poisonous? I put them on a toxicity level of, like if you do 1 to 100, 100 kill you. Everything is on the scale somewhere. It just doesn't taste good, maybe down with a 1 or 2. And then you have everything in between. Makes you gag, makes you burn. And then there's ones that like, boop, like a poison dart frog, and you're out. In our state, we don't have anything typically really far up on that scale. Toads can definitely, obviously, as I mentioned, make your mouth go numb. And so it's something you wouldn't want to get in your hands. Newts around here, if you ever heard of a newt, you want to wash your hands. Newts can make you pretty sick. Pickerel frogs is another one that can also have a lot of toxins. But how do you know if you hear a toad? Well, I'm sure everybody's heard one. If you're not, you're going to hear it and you'll be like, I've heard that before. It's a pretty distinct call. Now, this is not a species that typically is calling yet, but you're going to hear them pretty soon. Usually in April, they'll start calling. So if you guys can hear that, hopefully you can hear it. That should be a high-pitched trill, which is a nice melodic sound. If you listen, he's going to take a breath. Oh, there he took a breath. So if you listen right there, that's the way that a lot of times when they first come out of winter, whoop, he's going to call again. You can actually tell that it's a toad calling, because sometimes you'll hear it's cold and it's not a really loud trill. But you can actually hear them take a breath, whereas like an insect sometimes can make some noises similar. But insects don't need to take a breath to make noises, and these guys do. Somebody said they're not hearing the toad. Did anybody not hear the toad? Let's see.
It came through for me.
Okay. Well, if I have to, I'll make the noise, but it's like, so hopefully you can hear that. But that's kind of what it sounds like, and we can share these out. I'll give you guys a link to where you can go back and listen to all these calls if you couldn't hear them. I would try maybe turning up really loud, just hopefully it doesn't blow out your ears or something like that. Now, the next ones I'm going to kind of go through, these are the spring breeding frogs. These are the ones I'm looking for. And if you happen to hear these in your area, I would like to know, because I'm trying to pinpoint where they've disappeared from. I still get people telling me that they might be in the Webster Grove area, that might be Kirkwood area. I don't think they are anymore. I think they might have been, but I think they're gone. Sometimes there's a misidentification. Sometimes tree frogs and a few other species get misidentified as these particular ones, the spring peeper and the chorus frog. These are the earliest ones. So right now, these are calling. At the very end of my presentation, I'm going to show you a video of them calling. But this is a peeper. So they make like a peeping noise, and they do come out early. Hopefully you can hear that. It's like a beep, 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 pretty loud peeping noise. That's what a good chorus sounds like. And it's pretty loud. You wouldn't believe it, but it's interesting when you look at frogs and you look at like what noises can they make. Well, a good way to think about it is they have different vocal sacs. Oh, somebody says they have them at Waterloo. Yay! They have different vocal sacs arrangements, and so peepers and like chorus frogs, they have basically a sac underneath. They have a sac under the throat. The toad has a sac under his throat. And as I move on to some of the other frogs, I'll point out some huge differences. And there's different arrangements. Some have sacs on the side of their throat. They have two, and then some look like they swallowed a balloon. Um, oh, somebody heard them west. Oh, cool. So if you happen to hear these and you can record them, please send me a recording or put it on a naturalist or something like that. And I'll talk about how to do that because it actually puts some data that I don't have. And actually using community science or crowdsourcing is probably the best way. Yeah, I can put recording devices in a lot of places, but unfortunately using our telephones is probably the best way. Now the chorus frog that also comes out, these guys are a little more sensitive, so they usually overlap where you find these guys, but not always. So this is sounds like a lot of people say your finger across the comb. I don't think that's what it sounds like, but um, it's a pretty unique sound. I always think they sound like taking a rain stick, you know, those little beads dropping down or something like that. It's a very unique sound. Yay, somebody says they heard them out at Riverlands. So these guys are really unique. They're, like I said, they are a little more sensitive and they're more diverse. So there's a lot of different kinds of chorus frogs. In our area, we have the arboreal chorus frog. They've changed taxonomic names recently, but these guys I can't find typically inside that 270 bell. You got to be outside, which is why you're finding them at Riverlands. And there's a lot of, I mentioned different species. So if you get in the Illinois side or you go to different places in Missouri, farther south, you're going to pick up different species of our chorus frogs. They're pretty unique. Some of them are very specific to habitat changes. Now, other members that belong to this, which everybody has heard, this is the one that I usually get people complain about because they like people, and there's a good reason why. These guys are really cool. So they live up in the trees. They do typically will come down and breed. And the reason why they like people, well, the reason is because we build buildings, and you can climb on a building and you can make your sound echo. You can go in a fence post and sit there and echo. So typically about, we're almost in April, as you get near the end of March and April, you'll start hearing them on rainy days. You'll be high up in a tree, and then they work their way down, and you'll hear them about fence level eventually, and then boop, a big rainy day in April, and they will be everywhere on the ground, and you'll hear them. It is neat to listen to them, at least spatially, make their way down to the ground. But this is probably the most common, and these guys are pretty tough. We do have two species in our area. There are people that claim you can tell the difference between them, that we have the gray tree frog and the Coke's gray tree frog. Visually, they're pretty similar. In sound, they're also pretty similar. They've actually two species that have evolved very similar habitats and very similar call, which is kind of cool. Genetically, they're not related, but it is pretty unique. The difference is how many trills per second. So I don't know, maybe getting old, I can't tell the difference between trills per second without recording it and graphing it. And it depends on actually the temperature. So if you're really cold in the spring, well, it doesn't matter which species of gray tree frog you might be, it's going to be slow because the temperature affects calls, which is neat. Now, this is the other one I'm going to play, which is the cricket frog. This is my favorite frog, actually. These are the hardest one to catch. If you're ever teaching a program with little kids and you find cricket frogs, these are the best because you can't catch them, but it keeps kids busy. This is the one that I'm like, go catch one, and they'll an hour about they're trying to catch one, they never get one. They're really fast, but they make a noise that sounds like two marbles hitting together. Pretty distinctable to hear this noise. And if you happen to go canoeing or something like that, this is one a lot of times you'll hear on the gravel bar. A lot of times, I find them on the Merrimack. You can find them obviously in ditches and stuff like that. This is the most common of these early spring breeding frogs. They haven't come out, or I shouldn't say they're not calling yet. They're not breeding yet. I've caught a couple of them already out that are moving around. They come out early on the leaf litter, but they don't breed yet. And so they are, I think, unique, but they jump like a cricket. And they're really huge, powerful back legs. The way that I identify these guys is they have kind of like they have bumps on their skin, kind of like a toad, but they are slimy and they have little toe pads. And since they all belong to the tree frog family, you could just think of them as tree frogs have the best toe pads, they stick on stuff. And then you have cricket frogs on the bottom. They have crappy toe pads, so they don't go very high. And then spring peepers, they can stick to like grasses and stuff like that, but they don't go very high. And chorus frogs are somewhere in between. But they all have evolved similar adaptations because they're from the same family. They're related to each other in the bigger picture of tree frog family. Now, this is one of my favorite frogs. And so this is a true frog. So a true frog meaning there are other things we use the word frog for, but this is a good example as related to your green frog, your bullfrog. And the one I'm going to show you right now, the way you can see it in this picture, it's not a great picture, but has lateral lines. It's a fold of skin with a nerve that runs down the side, which makes it pretty helpful, especially to identify different types of actually leopard frog. So the northern leopard frog has a stripe, but it's broken down here in the back. There's a plains leopard frog. So you can actually use that as identification. You can get a book out. It's not too hard if you catch one. Usually our leopard frogs have more green on them in our area. They have a pointy little nose. But their call is very distinctive, and they are actually one of the early breeding frogs. They just happen to be a big frog that comes out early. Most do not. Most big frogs come out later. This is an exception. We have two. So the wood frog and the leopard frog come out really early. Sometimes you might see you hear, we don't have them in our area, but the crayfish frog or a pickerel frog. Pickerel frog we occasionally have here and there, spotty areas with them. But this is one that they're everywhere. They're in Forest Park now, which is neat because they were not in 2004 all the way up to 2011. So my hunch is somebody threw some into Forest Park because I don't know how else they would get there. But we've had now a huge population that spread from the Kennedy Woods area all the way across. Now they're in the zoo. They actually come in the zoo and breed. They're in like the South Pond. So they're everywhere. So I'm sure you've heard this before, but they make like a rubbing the balloon and then a laugh. Thank you. So usually as it gets cold, you'll actually hear the rubbing balloon noise, and it might take them a while. Then once they get going, now the reason why all these frogs make these noises in the first place is basically to find a girlfriend. Both male and female have the anatomy to make noises, but typically behavioral wise, the males make these calls, and the main purpose of it is selection. So the females select what sounds the best. What sounds the best? I have no idea. However, we do know from different studies out there, if you're sick, if you're small, you don't make the exact same frequency and everything like that. So there's definitely a selection out there, which is what females are looking for. But males are basically in a calling contest. So they're usually jockeying, trying to get a good position for their sounds they can sound really loud and healthy. And so they're usually fighting for a position in a pond. Which brings us to the next couple animals to wrap up. The next two largest frogs are the most common ones as you'll find. We've now kind of shifted all the way from through the spring. Now we're starting the end of the spring and into the summer. You'll start hearing the green frog, and then eventually you hear the bullfrog. And these are big guys. These are like you need 2 hands to hold some of these guys. They're big. They look similar to each other. The difference is you can't see this picture, but the green frog has a lateral line. The bullfrog doesn't have a lateral line. He has like a wrinkle that goes around his ear. That's the way it's helpful because sometimes you catch a juvenile bullfrog and you're like, hey, it looks like a green frog. But if you don't see that lateral line, it's a little young juvenile bullfrog. So the noises they make, I don't like the green frog noise. Nothing against green frogs, but it sounds terrible, I think. But nothing the banjo-y sound and they're blowing these noises, and they have ears, so they're blowing these noises across their vocal cords. Is the noises they're making. So if you hear that, you'll hear it a lot actually, and then they get a lot. If you imagine, like 50 of them making that noise, it gets pretty noisy. And the bullfrog has like a deep. People use the phrase jagorum, but it's like. And the reason why is his air sac is completely enveloped underneath his skin. So his entire chest and body vibrates. And because he's a larger animal, has more weight to him, and the vocal cords are bigger, they can make a deeper noise. And the deeper sounds physically, they'll travel farther. And so you can I can't always hear it, and they can hear each other a mile apart. And there's usually less of them because they're pretty territorial. They will eat other small bullfrogs and other species. So typically in a pond, you don't have a lot. Unlike spink peepers, when they come out, like they're like millions of them. Bullfrogs, they breed a lot, but they fight and they eat each other out, and you get down to just a few dominant ones in a pond. But because of that, they can make those sounds longer, and so the females can be pretty far away and still hear them, which is very helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and play the bullfrog sound. So hopefully you can hear that, and there's a couple species calling in the background. It's hard a lot of times to hear I get a clean call. I do have some. I didn't put them in this particular presentation. The nice thing is, after 10 or 15 years of collecting calls, I have hundreds of hours of calls. If you guys ever need more recordings, let me know. I can send you recordings. I'm working on cleaning some of them up, but the nice thing is I own them, so I can give them away copyright free. Now, this is actually what happens. So if you really want to get involved in different projects with frogs, it is great, just like bird calls, to learn them. However, what you're going to find is they, just like birds, they don't always all just call one at a time. There's lots of them at the time. So if you think of a chorus, some of them will use overlap in certain habitats, and so you'll have different species. And this is a good collection where you'll find a lot of these guys breeding in the spring at the same time in the same pond. And so getting good at listening to frog calls, it does take practice. Usually what I do is I close my eyes and I listen. Some people like cup their hands around their ears or something like that. But I get really good at focusing on one call. And then once I know what it is, I'll go to the next one. And some of them are hard. When you add in 100 of each of these, it doesn't always sound exactly like just one calling, because they compound and they sound differently. And some of them are louder than others, depending how close they are to you or just the noises that they make. And some, like the toad, they disappear into the background because it's hard to hear. But this is a good example of a recording I took. I think this one was at Nature Preserve. So if you can hear that, those are peepers calling. There's a leopard frog calling. Oh, there's a toad that just started calling. And the peepers are really loud. And that'll give you an idea. So that is what a typical night sounds like when they breed. And to give you an idea, they breed in like a succession. So they'll come out early, and it's like going to a party. So you always have that one guy who comes out or comes to the party too early. Same with a frog. We got that one who's like, beep, beep. Ain't nobody answering him. They're like, dude, he got too early. And then you get a couple more and a couple more, and then maybe a couple days go by and it starts to rain, and then boom, the whole bunch of them come out, and there's a huge party. And I was out 4 days ago, and we found leopard frog eggs. I mean, there are leopard frogs everywhere, and there's big piles of eggs floating in the water. So they come out and they breed, they lay eggs, and then it'll calm down a little bit, and then there'll be another party, and then after about a month, depending on the species. And the reason why they come out at different times, it happens to be the habitat they pick. So a lot of these early spring breeding frogs, a lot of times they'll choose fishless ponds, and sometimes those are areas that are ephemeral, which means they'll dry out. And so the eggs have to hatch, metamorphosize all the way to an adult, and get out of the water before the water disappears. So some of these will actually go through the complete metamorphosis in a month, which is amazing. And there is some push as the water gets smaller, and you actually get more of the individuals bumping into each other. They'll metamorphosize a little faster. Which is pretty unique. And then you have like bullfrog on the other end, where they take 2 years. So they take a long time to metamorphosize. So they'll actually lay an egg, goes all the way to a tadpole, and he just buries in the mud for the winter, and the next year he grows his legs. So you have really unique choices. And the reason why is, well, a bullfrog tadpole is huge, and they're toxic. They don't taste good, and animals don't like to eat them a lot. Whereas a spring peeper, everybody likes their eggs. Everybody likes their tadpoles. Taste good, I guess. So they're usually laying a lot early in the spring and hoping to get out of the water and metamorphosize fast. And so it is unique why they have all these different noises and different habitats of where they're going to lay eggs. Now, I thought we'd do a little fun thing here, and you can maybe in chat or somehow throw it out there, but let's see if you recognize what's calling. So if you want, go ahead and throw out what you think it is. We've heard it already. That's just one individual calling of the species. Yep, that one does sound like marbles. And it looks like most people remember this one or heard it before. That indeed is the cricket frog. So that is a cricket frog calling. And it does sound like marbles. And just something you know that if you during the breeding season, as the hormones kick in, you can actually play these noises on a phone, and they a lot of times call back to you. And the reason why is because when they hear a male call, they're like, "Oh no, you didn't. I'm gonna call louder." So you can actually play these. Don't do a lot, but you could play it. And they'll, a lot of times they'll call back to you. It's a good way to survey for them. I've done this in Forest Park with a toad call, and I couldn't see any toads. I'm like standing around like there's no toads, and all of a sudden you're surrounded by them, and you're like, "Where are they?" They're like sitting in the leaves around you calling. It is neat, and it works on certain species, especially ones that breed explosively and ones that are right in the middle of the breeding season. That does work actually to give them a call back. Maybe you could hit marbles. Maybe it'll be enough sound. It'll sound like it. Never try hitting marbles to see if I can get somebody to call back. Now, the question for this one is how many different species of nematodes do you call? So I'm thinking of a number. So somebody says three. This is four. All right, you guys are pretty good. So most people have 3 or 4 out there, and indeed, you guys are pretty close. I know exactly how many are out there, and the reason why is I made this call, so I actually laid tracks down so that I could actually know exactly how many are in there. And so what you were hearing in there, so wait a second, because everybody's putting answers in here. All right, competition. Oh, somebody even put out what they think it is. All right. Well, there are actually 3 calling. I know there's 3 calling because I laid the tracks down. Let's see if you guys can guess how many. I'm going to go backwards here. How which species they were. Anybody guess which species they were calling? Do you want me to make a call again? I'll go back so you can hear it again. All right, see if you guys can guess which ones are calling. Well, there were 3. There's 3 species. Right, so we got Beeper and American Toad. So you guys are really good. So it looks like you got all of them. It is the species that people are putting out there. So you guys got it. So it is the American toad, cricket, and spring peeper. Now that's just 3 species and one individual of each species. So if you add in 20 to 30 to 50 of each, it doesn't sound exactly like this. It's pretty hard sometimes, but that gives you an idea and a good way to practice listening to them. Learn your one individually, and then start listening to recordings that have lots of them calling. The other way to do it also is when you hear something you don't know, it's also very helpful because then you can actually try process elimination. Peepers usually call in the spring, and so do quartz frogs. So a lot of times you might be hearing things that call together. You're not going to hear a bullfrog usually and a spring peeper calling at the same time. Not impossible, but not usually. So there's lots of good ways to narrow it down since there's only a total of 23 species in like the state. So in our area, there's usually like 10-ish species calling. So it gives you a pretty good idea. It's not terribly hard. However, it is good to know there are other noises these guys make. They don't always make just this is the breeding call that they're making. They do make different noises, and one being, which is kind of unique, is they're agnostic or and call when they're angry or they're fighting with each other. I don't know all of them, but I know the tree frog one goes kind of like a turkey. But that's actually 2 tree frogs are done breeding and 2 males are fighting over a tree branch or something like that, which is pretty unique. I only know that because, well, I recorded it and sent it to the sabertologist, and after a month of them arguing, they all agreed it was a tree frog calling, fighting over or something. So they do make these different noises. Now, how can I help with frog and toad conservation? You probably already are, with your Missouri Master Naturalist program. The couple of different ways I'm going to put out here, just different suggestions. So I have 2 big programs that I'm using under the umbrella of FrogWatch, and one's called FrogWatch Lite, and the other one's called FrogWatch Volunteer. FrogWatch Lite is depending on how much time you have, and this one it's helpful to do both. If you happen to have iNaturalist, I'm going to jump into what FrogWatch Lite is, and a lot of people, I'm not going to go too heavy into iNaturalist because most people in your group probably know what iNaturalist is. But if you happen to have an account with iNaturalist, you can record frog calls or pictures. I prefer frog calls. I have some projects. So if you have your account in there, all you have to do is add any of these. And I have a geofence if they're somewhere in the metro area and the statistical area, I should say, of St. Louis. So that's St. Louis City, county, and all surrounding counties. It'll be pulled into my project, and it gives me an idea of where the presence and absence of certain species are. So FrogWatch Volunteer gives me the phenology, the timing, and everything. This one just kind of shows me the presence and absence, which is also very helpful. It gives me a good place to look. A lot of times I use this and then I'll get permission and go put a recording device, and get a really good recording. So it's very helpful. And if you're not too familiar, this is all I'll go into. What an observation is, which is very helpful, is obviously what you saw, who you are when you have an account, when you saw it, the date and time, which is very helpful to me, and your evidence and where you saw it. What I'm interested in, I do look at pictures, but pictures are sometimes hard. I prefer the audio, and so I have two projects out there. So if you happen to put a picture or you happen to put an audio, I have two projects. So one's an audio project, and it used to be called Frog Call STL. Now it just says FrogWatch Lite, I think. And then there's a picture one. So regardless of which one you do, if it comes research grade on either of them, it'll end up in my project. I monitor all of these, so I'm on there quite a bit, and I know lots of other people are. Trying to push these to research grade so that they become useful. But this is a great way that if you don't have a lot of time, but you just hear something, snap a recording. You can also send me a recording. I love when people send me a recording, so I enjoy listening to them and trying to figure out what they are. But the way it works is these actually feed into two things. So this FrogWatch, which is our chapter, is actually my education wing of my Spring Peeper program. So this is the education part of it. And I use them for training purposes. I also use them for surveying for the Spring Peeper program. So it actually helps support both of these two projects at one time. Now, we have rebranded, and so if you happen in the past heard that something called FrogWatch STL, we are the same thing, except I grew bigger. So I partnered this year, starting last year, but I partnered with NGREC, which is the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center. So now we are a huge chapter on two sides of the river. So we basically have formed a bigger chapter. So on the Illinois side, we are the same chapter, and I work with Jessica, who works out at NGREC, and so we do training. She does most of them on the Illinois side, and I do most on the Missouri side. But we rebranded as the Gateway chapter, and to be more inclusive, and kind of that way we have training sites all over the city now. We have some new training sites that are popping up pretty soon. So we'll have some down near the Lower Merrimack area, near South County. That's our newest one, and I'm just developing that this year, so it should be live by next year for training. And then we have one at Shaw and stuff like that. So what our chapter services is all these areas. So if you happen to live in any of these areas and you'd like to participate in FrogWatch or any of these, we actually will survey all of these. We train people on the protocols that you would need to know and the auditory for all these things to help collect data. Now, they use a program called FieldScope. And so it's different than iNaturalist, so you'd have to learn a new program, but that's how they put their data in. They use a different platform. And what FrogWatch is in a nutshell, it was started a long time ago in 1998, which is a long time ago. So there's a huge data set since that time, and it's basically the entire country. Now, chapter-wise, they started on the East Coast, and then they grew into the United States, and they skipped the Midwest, and they started growing really fast on the West Coast, and then they started sprouting up in the Midwest. There's lots of areas where we don't have a lot of data. I am trying to create new chapters, so if you know people that are interested, like, I don't know, Columbia, Missouri or something like that, let me know. I got a chapter started in Springfield, but we're trying to expand even more. Right now, FrogWatch used to be run by the American Zoological Association. It is no longer. It now is run just by a particular zoo, which is the Akron Zoo. But right now there are over 100, I think there's more than 130, I think there's 150 chapters now across the country. And so we are just one of those chapters, but our data just feeds our information that we need, but it also is like a national database that they're looking at big changes, which is really unique. And I go over that in the trainings, but they're looking at phenology changes from climate change and stuff, and also invasive species. I have a recording that somebody sent me. I think it's true, that somebody lost a Cuban tree frog in downtown St. Louis. So there's been a couple of recordings posted. I don't know if he's still down there, but there was a Cuban tree frog possibly calling, which would not be a native species to our area. So they do pick up a lot of neat stuff. So if you are interested, we do have trainings coming up. So a quick plug that if you're interested after tonight and you're like, I want to join a training, we have one coming up at Riverlands, which is, wait a minute, it already happened 21st? No, It's coming up soon. And then we have one at the 26th at Shaw Nature Preserve. And then I'm doing the very last one at the St. Louis Zoo. So those are the trainings that we have last. The last one will be in the beginning of April. After that, I typically don't offer trainings only because we're right in the middle of the season. But if you're interested, feel free. And if you happen to miss these, but you're really interested, reach out to me and we can work something out if you need to go through maybe an online training or something like that. I don't have a problem with that. I would recommend, it's a brand new website. So if you happen to check it out, I have frog calls on there. I've tried to change our website so it's a little more friendly for the general public as far as resources. If you become a member or volunteer, there's also another website that has even more frog calls and other resources on there. But this one is where you can go to find out where trainings are happening because all of our trainings you need to register in advance just so we have a spot for everybody and handouts. But check out our website. If you find an issue with the website, let me know. I am the one running the website, so I'm not an expert, but I think it's doing well. So, but let us know. And then you can always follow us on Facebook. We do have a fairly active account now, so feel free if you want to post frog calls or ask questions on Facebook. I co-manage it, so hopefully you'll get a response back. I do try to keep up with it. And I thought we'd wrap up real quick with questions, but I thought for fun, this is just to give you a little taste of what's happening right now. I recorded this about, I don't know, 5 days ago. If you take a look, I'll zoom in and it's not the greatest video, but there's a peeper. You gotta wait for it. There he is. He's on the top up there, peeping. There he is. Whoop. And you'll see a bunch of them right here. So this is a good example of what happens when they're all breeding. It's pretty loud. And if you think it's loud, you should have been actually standing there. When I got back into my car, I couldn't hear anything. It is really loud. And the decimal wise, it actually will cause hearing damage if you're there too long. I'd recommend earplugs if you're like surveying. But it is a good example. So I thought we'd wrap up now. I think we're about on time here. So if somebody has questions, I saw some hands up in here. If you want to unmic and ask a question, I can take a look if there's any other things I missed. Or if any of the other moderators see something I missed, feel free to let me know. I know Victoria had a hand up over there, at least. And feel free to, oh, go ahead.
Chris, Cole, and Valerie, your hands are up. So if you had a question, go ahead. Otherwise, you can lower your hand. There was a question in the chat. Bob wanted to know, do these vocalizations create a vulnerability to predation?
Good question. I'm going to stop presenting real quick. The answer is yes, they do. Sometimes they can be predated on while they're making these noises. The difference is it's basically, which is unique. This is actually makes it the best time to catch them actually, because they're more focused on actual breeding than they are their own life, because they don't pass on their genes. It doesn't really matter if they get eaten. But occasionally, yes, I have seen them be eaten while they're trying to mate. But typically by mating in the water, they're a little bit less vulnerable than they're on the land, and it's at nighttime. But yes, there are a few species that might try to get them. But being in mass numbers, I think it helps. It reduces the individual predation amount by having big groups of them. But the answer, yes.
Looks like Valerie does have a question. If you want to unmute yourself, Valerie, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I took the training at Riverlands last time. It was the FrogWatch STL. And the problem was to find a spot at night or evening to do the survey, because most of the state parks and the county parks all closed at that time. So do you have any suggestions on where to do this?
Yeah, so number one, if you're having trouble, you can individually reach out to me or any other trainers. We can help you find a spot. We are working on, for all of our areas, to have chapter sites as well. So this would be, instead of registering your own site, we have a chapter site to where we have permission to go and stop and listen for frog calls. So it's like a pre-registered site. And all you'd have to do when you go on there is you pick the registered site and then add your observations. And I'll give you an example. This place may not be helpful, but we have Jefferson Barracks is one. Forest Park is one, and we're adding more on there. I know Ingrek is working on one. And these are places that you can be at legally up to 10 o'clock at night. So one of the big requirements is you have to be there half an hour after sunset. And it is a problem.
Okay, so just to clarify, so that's what we were doing is a half hour after sunset.
Yeah.
And there was one evening at Riverlands when nobody showed up to do it. So I was the only one. So so I think one of the questions was, when is this done? So it's always a half hour after sunset, or is it also in the morning?
No,
the frogs I heard at Riverlands were doing the about 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning the other day. We were doing another project.
To do FrogWatch, just because of the protocols of FrogWatch, which are, a national chapter, we can't change the protocols. It has to be a half an hour after sunset, and you listen for 3 minutes. And so whatever you hear in those 3 minutes, even if you hear things before it or after it, and we can go back over that in the training. So if you've already gone to the training, I can always, I'll give you a hint. Everybody's on here, but if you go to the training, we give you a password to go to a volunteer training site, and it has the protocols as a refresher. But one of the things you would need to do is listen for you wait for 2 minutes. When you get there, acclimate, and then you listen for 3 minutes, and that's what you record. And you can always write in notes like, I heard a bullfrog calling, but not during my 3 minutes. So you only record what you hear. And in FrogWatch, we train you to also look at, they rate them basically on intensity. And so it's basically 0, like nobody called. And then you have 1, which is like 1 or 2 calling, and then you have a 2, which is like 10, and then you have a chorus, which is a 3. And that information they've been using because you really can't. It's hard to count how many, like an actual number. So it gives you a way to look at the breeding season as they come out, and you'll have a couple in the breed. Usually when you hear a chorus, people are laying eggs. So it gives you an idea of how they go up and down in the season wise. But to answer your question, I have sites where you can drive your car up, roll your window down, and listen, and roll your window back up, and drive home and go put the data in. And so legally, it's places you're allowed to park, at a park up until the 10 o'clock time. Like it's a curfew time.
Will this be done as a group? Because whenever you go into a park at night, you always have the safety issues in some areas, especially.
Correct. I would recommend going as a more than one person at least. And one person has to have an account. You wouldn't want to be putting in, the same thing everybody's hearing at the same time. So I pick one person's account when you go out to survey, if you're picking the same place. And I'm happy to talk to you at any point. You can reach out to me and we can talk over the phone. I can go back through some of the protocols, and I can give you some good resources that might be helpful, and maybe you can tell me where around the St. Louis area you're interested in, and I can see if we can help find you a place. And yes, there are places that you may ask to go and you're told no, and for good reasons. And I'm happy to ask on your behalf, and we may be also told no. There's a lot of places that I can't go as well at nighttime. We are also starting to get involved using recording devices. So we got permission now from the national level to actually put recording devices out, collect that, and actually put that up as data, but it's flagged as people are listening to recording devices and not there in person. And if anybody has an interest in doing that, let me know. It's just it's like a third way to help, another way to help besides monitoring your own spot. You can listen to recording devices. I do that with schools. So if anybody knows like a teacher that's really interested, it works really good with schools because they can't a lot of times go at nighttime or can't go more than once, but they can listen to stuff in a classroom during the daytime.
So I worked with Corrine with the Army Corps of Engineers, and she said that's what her fallback was to do, is when only one person showed up, she was going to put the audio out. And she was stating that they actually get stolen a lot. So you have to put them in rather obscure areas.
That is 100% correct.
The audios get stolen? Oh, they're also very expensive.
They do. They are.
I think we've got, I want to make sure we have time to get some other questions in, and I think we're running out of time. So Victoria, I saw your hand up.
Hi, yeah. Some of these, so I was just looking for them online. Is there a registration or pre-registration for the Audubon Center at Riverlands? Because I don't see one on their website right now for March 21st, but maybe I'm just not looking at the right
There
place.
should be.
Could they be filled up? Could it be that they've already?
Yes, it's coming up very shortly. I have it on my calendar. August Weiss is the person.
Yep.
And I just don't have my calendar with me. It's on a Saturday. And
Yeah, it's 9 a.m.
I want to say.
Audubon.
But August Weiss is the person up there. Michael might. I just don't have my calendar in front of me.
Yep.
But it's coming up.
I'll have to check just to make sure it hasn't filled up. But good question.
Okay.
I can find that out and I can send it
doubt
to you guys.
I doubt it filled up.
Okay. I can send you a link because they do have registration for it.
Right.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah, good questions.
And I think, Lisa, do we have time for one more, or do we need to move on to the next agenda item?
Yeah, we have time for one. Well, I have a question.
Go ahead.
We have time for one more. Like when we're talking about habitat restoration, and I think a lot of people worry about mosquitoes in the same kind of areas where frogs and toads would thrive. Do mosquito dunks harm them besides taking away their food?
No. I have not found any substantial studies that show that they have any harm on frogs or toads at all. And I used to install water gardens in my past, and that was our choice that we used to use as well. And you're correct; it does obviously take away food sources. It doesn't kill all mosquito larvae, but it's a good way to control them and in those areas. So that's my opinion, but I have not seen any studies published that shows that it makes any harm to frogs or toads or tadpoles.
Did you see any other questions in the?
There was one from Kathy. She wanted to know more about the stream team that you're creating.
Sure. Real quick, right now we're not we haven't made a public announcement, but until now, I guess. We are created it. It's off Gravelway Creek near the Meissen. I never get it right. Trailhead. That's probably not right, but it's along Interstate 50. Yeah, 55. But we are getting it rolling now. We went through training and everything, so we'll have it going. This year is our pilot year to make sure we know what we're doing. But we will basically have it on the zoo's website and our FrogWatch website probably by the end of the year, because we'll be looking for volunteers for trash pickups and other things around there, as well as the macro surveys and stuff like that. But I am excited about it. It's another way that we can not only do great stream team work, but there are cricket frogs in that area. So we're trying to keep it cleaned up and see if we can keep that population. It's one of the few I found on Gravelway Creek, which is unfortunate. I've only found a couple populations left of cricket frogs, and it's a pretty small one. And there's one in Maline Creek in the North County. But right now it'll probably by the end of this year, we'll have something published about it, like to the public and everything.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael.
Well, I wanted to say thank you. I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was so interesting, and I think you're going to get more people involved. So I'm so glad you came.
Yay. Reach out to me if you have questions. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody individually. So thank you.
All right. And at this
Michael,
point,
Mike will
go
be
ahead.
And Mike will be speaking at the conference too.
Oh, good.
Yay.
All right. At this point, we invite you to stay for our business meeting if you want to, but we also cut you loose if you want to go celebrate St. Patrick's Day or something.
I appreciate the invite, but I will actually log off, and I hope you all have a great night.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.